A very warm welcome to what is quite a big moment for us. This is the launch of our roadmap. So the Agri-Food for Net Zero, Roadmap for Resilience, a UK food plan for 2050. My name's Stefan Kepinski. I'm one of the co-leads of the network. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project and what we've been doing. We were established in 2022 by UK Research and Innovation. The aim was for us to promote engagement and interactions between scientists and researchers in UK universities and institutes, and practitioners, policymakers, and industry, all with the aim of addressing the challenge of transforming our food system to meet the climate challenge. I'm going to say at this point, that was the primary focus of the inception of the project, was around decarbonisation. But as you will hear today, the recommendations that we're laying out in the report go way beyond emissions reduction and deliver multiple co-benefits if we can get the coordinated action right. So since the start of the project, we have created a network of over 3,000 members, all working in some way across the food system. We've commissioned over 30 scoping study projects and built an extensive knowledge exchange platform, which includes our webinar series, which hopefully some of you would have seen, the regular digests, and 3 annual Big Tent events. So we've had 33 webinars, all with attendance in the hundreds, some going over 300. And it's been an excellent vehicle for us to engage with the diverse voices across the community. And at this point, I don't know where Jez is, but I'm just going to call out Jez. Is Jez going to wave? There she is, right at the back. Yes, Jez Friedenberg for her work with as our Knowledge Exchange Fellow and on those webinars. Throughout the project, we've been aided in driving progress by an absolutely excellent project team, and also by 3 cohorts of champions, all with different expertise in different dimensions of the food system. There have been 21 champions in all, and I can see many of them in the audience today, and it's a delight to see you here today. So thank you for all of your input into the work we've done, including the roadmap. And one of the things that they were tasked with doing was ensuring that there was inclusive input into everything that we're doing in the AFN project, including the production of this roadmap. Inclusivity and openness has been one of the guiding principles of the network, and that just doesn't stop at how we operate the network. We also have a focus on just transition and the impacts that food system transformation is going to have on people and communities. So in terms of the arc of the project, there have been 3 distinct phases. We began with an extensive scenarios exercise where we were envisioning and exploring different food futures for different sort of forms of the food system in 2050. And the idea of that was to break out of business as usual thinking, to stretch thinking, and as part of that work, it enabled us to understand how the different pathways that you would follow to those futures would help the food system transformation contribute to the UK's commendable and hopefully unshakable statutory commitment to achieving net zero by 2050. The second phase, moving into the second year of the project, we were using those scenarios as a framework to identify and address critical knowledge gaps. And this led to the publication of our priorities for research and policy, which was published last year. I believe if I press this, another slide will appear. And now in the third phase, that's what brings us here today. So the roadmap for resilience. So our roadmap sets out the coordinated actions required to build a healthier, more resilient and fairer food system via 3 core transformations. It builds on all of the preceding phases of the AFN project, and it's been developed with the support of our 3,000 members. as I've mentioned already, a strong focus on inclusivity and bringing in diverse voices. During the development of the roadmap, there have been multiple opportunities for the community to feed into its development, and we have over 150 specialists who have had quite significant input into the development of the roadmap. And I'm very aware that many of you in the audience have contributed significantly, and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for that. It's been based on your input as well, and it's your roadmap, so thank you. We hope it's going to serve as a call to action for everyone in the food system, from policymakers and farmers to businesses and communities. So that's an overview of the roadmap. Just to give you an idea of what's happened, the shape of the rest of the afternoon, you're now going to hear from some of the other co-leads of the network, so Tim Benton, Sarah Bridle and Neil Ward, who are going to go into some of the context, the modelling framework and the main findings of the roadmap. And then following that, we'll move to a panel discussion where there will be an opportunity for some Q&A around the roadmap. So I'm now going to hand over to Tim.
Oh, those lights are a bit bright. Hello, everybody. Welcome, as Stefan has said. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context for the world as it is and the world as it might be. And I think if you look back 10 years, 2015, and predicted the world as we find it today, you would have been shouted off the stage. If you think about the world we were in then, pre-Trump, pre-Brexit, a world of international cooperation and norms, and look at us now. We're in a world where wars are affecting us, whether they're real, proxy, hybrid, or trade wars. We've had changes in the multilateral world in the last decade or so, undermining of cooperative approaches, the rise of nation-first nationalism, and a general undermining the rule of international law. We also have had widespread backtracking on climate commitments. We're pushing through the 1.5 degree barrier, and the news today is that global emissions are growing by a record amount, not shrinking. We're running away from our climate commitments. So today, as opposed to 10 years or so ago, we live in a world of disruption, contestation and conflict. And if you just take that last 10 years and run it forwards, the world is going to get become a more volatile place. And in a world of contestation and conflict and volatility, whether driven by climate change or geopolitics, two things will become increasingly important. Ensuring national security, and in our area, that's food security, through building resilience, and also adaptive change to cope with rapid change in the way the world works. Not just adaptation to climate change, but particularly and under-recognised in regard to the forces of globalisation and market drivers. So in sum, looking ahead, the world is going to be driven by change, I think. Every sector will have to change. Rapid and deep changes in the driving forces that impinge upon it, whether they be legal, regulatory, financial, or behavioural, those drivers will necessarily diverge from today. And the need for change has been writ large in recent years. I mean, I've been talking about these things for 20, 30 years now. We all know that change is coming and change is necessary. But so far, change has not happened at the scale and the speed with which it needs. And part of that has been that it's been kept at bay by incumbent pressures, maintaining the status quo. As volatility mounts, business as usual will necessarily have to change, because business as usual will not be tenable. And that change will be driven, not necessarily gradually, by events and sudden changes in pressures. So that's the world in general. Zooming in on the food system while we're here, we know today it's not working in the way that it needs to. We know that. We've all experienced in the last few years significant supply chain disruption and food price change, the cost of living crisis, driven by a combination of environmental and geopolitical drivers. As the world gets more volatile, our current food system will increasingly struggle to deliver what we want from it. Our food system in the UK remains responsible for some 38% of UK emissions, if you include the trade, a figure that is increasing as years pass and the energy sector decarbonises. As we don't tackle climate change, its impacts will get more disruptive, both at home for UK farmers and overseas through our supply chains. And we know also that poor diets are increasingly seen as a problem. And recent estimates suggest up to £268 billion is the direct cost to the UK from poor diets, whether that is in the direct ill health impacts or social support or lost productivity due to people not being able to work in the way that they need to. And about 2/3 of UK adults are obese. Our food system today is not working, and we know, looking ahead, that change is going to come. We have the challenges that we need to overcome that I've already outlined: adaptation to climate change, the need to preserve nature, the need to tackle our health issues. But on top of that, we will need to change as the market drivers, particularly those associated with trade, will change, driven by changing availability and price of food in the international market. So looking ahead, what is profitable to produce now might become less so. And in future, what is not profitable to produce might become more profitable to do so. The change drivers, particularly in the market, are likely to be volatile and fast-moving. And as I mentioned earlier, I think ensuring our national food security is going to become much more of an important lens to think about things rather than productivity growth of the agricultural sector, which has been the traditional lens that we've looked at food and agriculture. Our needs from the food system and the politics of the food system are likely to change radically into the future. Net zero as a goal cannot be wished away because it's inconvenient or it's a nice to have or whatever. The longer we go in not tackling climate mitigation, as well as adaptation to the disruptive weather, the longer we go in not tackling mitigation, the more that disruptive weather will become more disruptive. And so it will compound the challenges. So when we look ahead, we've got driving market changes driven by change in geopolitics in the world, climate change impacts. We've got climate change mitigation. We've got changes in attitudes, changes in nutrition needed, and changes in politics and markets writ large. So, in other words, change is necessary for us. The least tenable option is business as usual in terms of thinking that the way that we farm and the way we consume food over the last decade is going to be the norm for decades ahead. Change is coming. We have an opportunity to steer that change, and that's what our roadmap report is really about. Recognizing that as we adapt our food system to the new world and the increasingly volatile world, we have a chance to push it in the right direction to make it better for people and the planet, climate change, pollution and biodiversity. Now, as Stefan has mentioned, as the world in future is so uncertain, you can't predict what's going to happen. Although I often say we can predict that, as I've just said, business as usual is not really an option. The world ahead will be different and is likely to be more volatile and contested. but it is highly uncertain. Given that, how do we think about the future when it comes to thinking about planning for change? And the way that we thought about it was to undertake some scenario exercises to sample plausible futures, not predict what's going to happen, but to look at what might happen and look across a range of different futures that might evolve and say, well, if we want to improve our food system and the world is like scenario A or scenario B or scenario C, what would we have to do to make the food system better and tackle these big challenges? These plausible futures, the scenarios, we have then used to create a pathway from here to that future. And one of the reasons for doing these participatory scenarios, and the participants in this exercise were both members of the Agri-Food Network and a range of experts from trade, from the security services, thinking about the geopolitics and so on. If in multiple of these futures, you can only meet the challenges of net zero, nature, better health, food security through not reducing our self-sufficiency. If across a range of those futures, you can only meet them by doing certain things, then you know that your thinking about the future is likely to be robust to the way that the world might evolve. So what we did was we created these scenarios, and you can see from the words, those worlds are different. Those worlds are primarily different in the future by thinking about changing the trading environment through geopolitics and disruption and the way markets might evolve. And think about the way that the market forces driven by people's attitudes and politics, regulation, and those market drivers might be different. We took these sample of the futures, and then we used those as the rock on which to build our roadmap in terms of thinking about how to get from here to the future and make our food system better, and comparing across all of those 4 pathways and others from other scenario exercises using a quantitative framework that Sarah's going to talk about now, developing a land use and emissions calculator. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah. Now, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Tim. And yeah, I think you were being a bit modest there when you said, somebody said 10 years ago, this might happen. I'm sure there are reports out there with your name on which did predict a lot of this. And in fact, if you look at scenario A, I think it's quite sobering to think about how scenario A was written 2 years ago now. And actually, when you look at what's happened, there's quite a few things in there which have come to pass. So I want to talk a bit about the way that we work. If we're going to make big changes, how do we do that? Now, slight confession, I'm an astrophysicist. If you told me 10 years ago I'd be standing on a stage talking about food systems, I would have been quite surprised. But I think that I bring some perspective on the way that we work. And I'm going to be talking about quantitative modelling, computer modelling. Supposing you needed to change something, maybe if you're a food manufacturer wants to change the way that we produce something, how would you do that? You would go there, you'd make a computer model of that, you'd simulate it, and then you would see what are the implications for that. And if we're building a telescope, equivalently, we would go and we'd do a simulation of how that would work. So that's exactly what we've been doing in our project, and with the Fix Our Food project as well, is modelling in a computer how this would work. And in fact, the roadmap is a sort of exemplar of how it's informed by quantitative modelling, but also taking into account many other things which can't be put into the computer model. Just want to call out Juan Pablo Cordero. I don't want to wave. So Juan Pablo is the lead developer of our quantitative model, which is also, yes, definitely deserves a round of applause. Thank you. Yes, so this is really something that is in the public domain. It's actually not rocket science, not brain surgery, to put computer code out in the public domain. This is the way that computer science works, the way that particle physics works, the way that we oversaw and contributed to the way that astrophysics works over the last 20 years, is that people put all their code, all their data out in the public domain. And this is really essential for transparency, for driving collaborations across the whole system. This is possible, and it is not happening at all. When I come to this space, I look at the food system and I look at the disjointed nature of the way that we're working together. It is shocking to me to think that in astrophysics, we can model the universe, we know all about the universe, what's out there, and it's all public and open source and collaborative. And yet when we come to this pressing, urgent, essential, existential question of how we're going to produce food in the future, we are not working in this way. So that's just a sort of rant. I will move on to how we then worked. So we put together this code, we shared it, and we said, come and use our code, and share your code, and we'll work with you, and that'd be great. Guess what happened? Turns out most people are not coders in the food system. So we therefore made a web interface, which is so that everybody can play around with this model. And this web interface is something that you can play around with. But beyond that, what we really see is an ecosystem of people sharing codes and sharing the way that they're working so that we can all work together more seamlessly. So one of the things that we did this summer was to work on the fantastic Climate Change Committee, CB7, Carbon Budget 7, and try to work out in our model to reproduce that. And this is where we got to with this, and basing this on a DEFRA graphic that exists already and adapting it for our calculator, we managed to reproduce fairly well how that went. No criticism at all to the fantastic people who produced this, but looking ahead to future carbon budgets, future modelling from the CCRA, for example, we would like to see all of that code, all of that spreadsheets, all of the data assumptions that went into that immediately go public, open source, so that we're not digging around trying to guess at some of the assumptions. We had a lot of help from the CCC, were fantastic, but it should just be automatically developed in the public domain so that it's resilient and transparent. Thank you. Yeah, so then we went and we turned these scenarios that Tim just described into numbers and tried to reproduce what would actually happen in detail in each of these scenarios. Each of these 4 scenarios get to net zero, but in very different ways. So this really illustrates the range of options there are out there. In scenario A, this is the one that looks most like business as usual, build back faster, then you can see we're relying heavily on BECCS. But in other scenarios, for example, scenario D, you can see there's a lot of forest. In other scenarios, scenario C, a lot of mixed farming. So there's a lot of assumptions about how these would work, and that's something that we're delighted to talk to you about and you can play around with. But these all get to net zero. The other thing that we have looked at is self-sufficiency. So we're very conscious of the need for food security. We hear you talking about the importance of food security. And so one of the numbers in this model is the self-sufficiency ratio, the second column here. And actually, maybe you'd be surprised to see we can actually significantly increase self-sufficiency and also get to net zero in this model. So it's not actually impossible, but there's a lot of different ranges that you can, different things you can do there. And so actually what we'd really like to see is for you to play around with this model. And you can play around with these scenarios, you can perturb them. If you go to this URL from this QR code here, you can play around with the model on your phones now or on your computers later on. We'd be delighted to demo it for you, discuss it with you more. But this is really something that we've then gone and we've run millions of different options on the computer, sort of AI kind of approach. And we can't find a way to reach net zero within that model within the sensible, what we feel are sensible assumptions, without reducing ruminant numbers. So maybe you've got different assumptions. We'd like to know what those are. You can submit them on the website, and we'd love to discuss that with you more. But I'm going to hand over to Neil now, who's going to tell you much more about the roadmap and the implications of the quantitative modelling work within that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so hello everybody. So I'm Neil Ward, based at the University of East Anglia. I had three main areas of responsibility in the AFN network. I work with Jez helping plan the webinar series. I've worked with Tim and with Elta Smith, who's one of our third phase of champions, on coordinating the production of the roadmap. I'm also responsible for the management of the procurement of blade flags. And so these things. So there's quite a sense of achievement in all of those areas. As the network grew, I felt we needed bigger blade flags. So Sarah said the scenarios are a sample of possible futures. We modelled many, many more, and the modelling yielded some key insights for how we develop our food system and how we try and make it resilient in the face of the challenges, stresses and pressures that we can identify now and that we expect to become more acute in the decades ahead. 5 key messages come out of that work, that quantitative analysis, and I think they underline why we need transformational change and why the roadmap is framed in a terminology of transformational change. So we started off thinking about the net zero transition in 2022, but our language and our thinking has evolved, and we think the term transformation is more stretching and more ambitious than just a transition. So why we need transformation. So the first point is the one that Tim has already made. The system is going to change. There's no escaping that fact, whether it be having to adapt to climate change. So the Climate Change Committee today has warned that we can expect to hit 2 degrees C warming by 2050 and have some comments on how prepared we are for that. And there's the instability in the geopolitics as well. So there's a question of whether we're going to strive as a society to actively manage and navigate that change for optimum public benefit, or whether we're going to sort of just cling to the idea of maintaining the status quo and then be buffeted by the events and the ever-mounting pressures. The second point is that the farming system is going to change in response to these pressures. Farming is already under strain. When we were thinking about the net zero challenge, and sometimes some of these other types of challenges as well, you find that the policy discussion and the popular discussion often turns to the question of low carbon technologies. Well, it's about adopting new technologies, low carbon technologies, but improved animal breeding, methane suppressing feed additives, robots, drones, satellites, and so on. Our modelling suggests that whilst this is necessary, we need to adopt all of the low-carbon technologies going. It's not going to be sufficient on its own to get us to where we need to be. We're going to have to think about the changes to farming in terms of what is grown, as well as how it's grown, and what is consumed, what is asked of farming, as well as what farming produces. So rather than focus on just particular farming practices, fertilizer use, slurry storage, or whatever, the broad shape of farming is something that's going to evolve and is going to have to be thought about and ideally planned for. The third reason is it comes through clearly from the quantitative analysis that land use is going to have to change to accommodate to these pressures that we're going to face. This means we need to use the land more efficiently, but also that if you think about the UK land use in its entirety, that set of uses needs to map more efficiently onto the demands that we have of it and our needs, both in terms of diet and public health, but also resilience to climate change and reduction of emissions. The fourth argument is about diet change, the rationale for why we need transformation. And Tim's already talked about this a bit. So our diet is quite a problem at the moment. We've got about 2.8 million, 2.7, 2.8 million people permanently out of work due to ill health. Much of that is diet related. And so this is bringing acute pressures on the NHS and the public finances at a time of really tight constraints. But more than that, it's a real drag on the fundamental economic productivity of UK PLC. And this is something that has attracted the attention of the Treasury over recent years. So in these transformations, we have to try and move to a position where we are, as a population, consuming a healthier diet. And the final message, the final reason why we need transformational change is that this bundle of issues need to be thought of together. You can't really unpick them or leave one behind. Well, okay, we understand the farming change and the land use change, but the diet thing is a bit tricky, and that's the responsibility of someone over there, so we'll just do these two. They're inextricably intertwined and linked. And so that's why in the roadmap we talk about three core transformations that are intricately linked together. The net zero target for 2050, which was agreed in the dying days of Theresa May's premiership in 2019, that does set a statutory framework for a transition of sorts. But it also opens up an opportunity, and we think it's an historic opportunity, to deal with this bundle of challenges together. It's an opportunity to build resilience, make our system more robust, and navigate the changes that we expect to see. So we have three core transformations, and if pursued together, they would help reduce the healthcare costs that are driven by poor diet. They would strengthen national resilience in the face of a very uncertain world and uncertain trading arrangements, and they would provide healthy food for the UK population. There'd be a set of other benefits as well. The vision for agriculture and land use embodied in the roadmap would also reduce the drivers of poor river water quality in the UK. Current agricultural land use is a geographically extensive cause of some of our river water problems. It might not be quite as acute as the sewage discharge problems, but in some key catchments there are quite acute problems with our food production systems as well. And the nature and biodiversity challenge can be addressed alongside the development of a new greener rural economy in which agriculture and food production is repositioned alongside the other very valuable environmental services that are provided. So what we call the Great Unlock involves these three core transformations. We call them stronger, more resilient farming. That's the transformation in farming practice, but also in what is produced. Smarter, more integrated land use, and healthier diets made easier for people. And on the first of these, by strengthened resilience, we mean resilient businesses that also ensure the food system operates within its environmental limits, with production well matched to UK consumption needs and public health objectives, while enhancing the UK's food security. So through our modelling that Sarah was talking about, we tried to develop a pathway that didn't compromise the UK's current level of self-sufficiency in its food production, but ideally strengthened it and enhanced it. So we started out in 2022 with our central focus being on achieving net zero. That was what UKRI tasked us with doing. However, it's clear that agriculture is likely to face significant challenges irrespective of whether we had a net zero target or not least from the effects of climate change and from the international geopolitical instabilities. Our agricultural systems have become more specialised in terms of the enterprise mix and in terms of geography. About 85% of agricultural land supports animal production in one way or the other, either directly through the pasture land that the animals might graze on, or from the 40% or so of our arable land, which is producing animal feed. So this proportion is large, 85%, and it hampers our ability to build resilience and strengthen food security. Animals are going to be and going to continue to be an important part of the food system and the way that land is managed. They're going to be an important part of our farming system. But two highly desirable trends would be a rebalancing that reduces the total land take of animal agriculture, and at the same time, if we could develop a greater geographical mixing, especially in the arable east, where the animals and the crop production were brought closer together, that could help reduce our reliance on manufactured fertilizers as well. And it would help free up land for significant expansion in the production of vegetables, legumes, and other horticultural crops. Smarter, more integrated land use. There's lots of work going on now in the UK on land use in response to the recognition of the scale of the squeeze on land use and what we're going to be demanding of our land over the next 2 or 3 decades. So land needs to move from being a net source of emissions to a net sink. In European terms, the UK has a relatively low level of woodland or forest cover, 13–14%. And this is going to need to rise. CB7, the carbon budget, 7th carbon budget, talks of rising from 13 or 14% today to around 19%. In some of our scenarios, we think it might need to be even higher than that. And it depends on our willingness, really, to accept other sorts of changes. CB7 talks about 1.5 million hectares of UK land changing to woodland and energy crops by 2050. Which would mean rates of afforestation would need to probably treble from today's levels. Peatlands will need to be restored. We haven't deviated too much from the Climate Change Committee's recommendations regarding peatlands in our modelling. Crucially, land use needs to move away from being seen as a single use, a block of land being used for one purpose, to a situation where land is much more extensively and routinely thought of as doing more than one thing at once, serving several different purposes. Food production, carbon sequestration, nature restoration need to be delivered together in the same landscapes and often on the same plots of land. So critical for land use change to play its part in the overall transformation of the food system is the paring back of the 85% of agricultural land taken by animal production. This would help with the resilience of the system and better and more effectively match the productive capacity of the UK's land resource with nutritional and public health needs of the population. Our food security and resilience has been gradually compromised by way of letting our system just evolve over recent decades without a plan. Third transformation, healthier diets made easier. There's lots that can be said about what poor diet is doing to our public finances, our national economic performance, and just general welfare and well-being. Unhealthy eating is currently the default for a lot of people, and poor diet and poor access to healthy, affordable food is driving deepening social inequalities. Although meat and dairy production will continue to have a very important role to play in the system, in this third transformation, we do see a need to move to a greater diversity of protein sources, which would have the benefit of being less land hungry. We need to make healthy food more accessible and affordable, and this is likely to require a broad range of measures. They extend far beyond the usual calls for better information on labelling or better education, and build on the success of measures like the soft drinks industry levy model, which has helped in reducing the sugar content of soft drinks, but provides a model which we could pursue across a wider range of problematic ingredients in foodstuffs. What I found striking in looking at the analysis that came out of our modelling was the role that changing consumption habits could have on our food security and the resilience of our system. If change in production and consumption are thought about and managed together, they become part of a national mission that drives economic growth, improves public health, strengthens the resilience of our system, and could improve our national food security. We developed 10 priority actions. The roadmap has got lots of individual actions in those transformations. There's all sorts of detailed recommendations in the big report. Some of them are in the summary report, but the big report, which you can take as you go out, has got even more. But we pulled out 10, which are a bit more sort of overarching, and because when you do a press release, you need to have 10 priority actions. So I'm just going to quickly run through them. But the first one is about our agricultural subsidies. So we do spend quite a bit of money on agricultural support post-Brexit. We devised that scheme in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit referendum and in those early years after 2016. And I think that the profile of those measures is very much a product of that time. And it was a time where we were worried about nature and biodiversity, but perhaps the adaptation to climate change and the need to reduce emissions was not quite so widely understood and so high on the agenda. And we think that there's scope for rethinking the focus of those agricultural payments and trying to rebalance them a bit towards supporting the transition and strengthening resilience. And that might imply some shift from annual payments to capital grants in some areas. We suggest setting targets for dietary change and animal numbers. Animal numbers are coming down. And actually, if you look at animal numbers going back 150 years, it's quite interesting to see the extent that they do move around up and down. Sheep numbers have come down by about 10 million since the 1980s, from 40 million to 30 million. We can either just let that sort of happen as a result, as a secondary effect of a subsidy regime and agricultural economics, or it could be something that we could think about on a journey from here to 2050, as mapped out, say, in CB7, and report on it and monitor the effects and the winners and the losers and where that's causing difficulties and plan for it. We think that major food businesses should be required to publish food system transition plans. Some are producing some really nice material on their net zero targets and their science-based target initiative stuff, and so there's lots of new corporate material coming out there, but it would be quite good if that could be more standardized and data made more widely available for people to engage with and play with. The NHS Fit for the Future plan contains some welcome steps, but financial incentives for healthier food need to be extended way beyond just the soft drinks levy that's mentioned in that plan. Create a new committee. You have to say something about machinery of government, and you go to lots of seminars and workshops on the food system, and people say, we need to put it in the Cabinet Office. I worked in the Cabinet Office for a period, and it's quite interesting what an eclectic sort of bundle of stuff is in the Cabinet Office. And if you put everything in the Cabinet Office that people say should go in the Cabinet Office, you would end up with a government which was just a big Cabinet Office. And I don't know that necessarily it would be any more joined up than what we currently have. But there is an issue with cross-departmental working, and so we have offered up the suggestion of a National Food System Transformation Committee reporting to the Prime Minister through the Cabinet Office, of course. If anyone's got a better idea for cross-departmental coordination, we'd be really interested to hear it. But there is an issue of going ahead with two of the transformations and leaving, say, the diet one behind, because that's someone else's responsibility. More effective food system data, or food data systems to track progress. So Sarah's talked really persuasively about transparency in the data, in the models, and in the code, so that we can all, look at each other's work and test it and challenge it, and we will produce better knowledge and insight and better science through that transparency. We need agri-food system modelling to be, where the astrophysicists are with their collaboration and transparency. Introduce measures to protect and strengthen food security. We have this problem of trade deals sometimes sort of cutting across the food system and our domestic food security question. So we need to find ways of joining that up. Taking advantage of emerging opportunities to offset emissions, and also there's lots of interesting insetting within supply chains. So we do recommend establishing a British quality standard for the carbon calculator tools. I know there's some good work going on this very issue under the Lunds programme at the moment, but we've got too many diverse carbon calculators circling around that's causing a lot of confusion in terms of where people's baseline is and how they can be confident about how they're reducing their emissions. Integrated food and land strategies at the national, that's England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also perhaps the sub-national level, the regional level, to think about how we balance the nature restoration and biodiversity mission, climate change adaptation, and emissions reduction with food supply. We haven't really planned our food supply for decades. It used to be part and parcel of what government did. And if we're going to think about new crops and healthier and more affordable, healthier diets, we're going to need to actively stimulate new supply chains. There's some really good work being done on how you build a supply chain around beans with demand and supply at the same time, which requires system change. There's all sorts of innovations in terms of building public support and engaging diverse stakeholders. This stuff can get a bit sort of strongly contested sometimes, but there are ways in which we can work together, talk together, think together, that build consensus, find common ground. So we've got a recommendation on that. And finally, one, because we're academics, some of us producing the report, on interdisciplinary research. So we've moved quite a lot over recent decades, but we think that research in the agri-food system ought to really be normally interdisciplinary, and it becomes rather an exception to not have teams of microbiologists and social scientists working together, because we think you get better insight from having interdisciplinary mixes of teams producing knowledge. Getting near to the end. There's a real urgency to this. We've got 25 years to 2050, and I've been playing Cher's Believe song, which is very, very contemporary. It's got a really pumping bass line to it. And, when you hear it, you think, oh, yeah, I remember bopping about to that, as if it was just yesterday. But it was 25 years ago. So we are as far away from Cher's, I haven't got it with me today, but we're as far away from Cher, I believe in life after love, as 2050 is. That's how soon it will be. It will go before you even know it, will be there. But we can't push ahead on all fronts at once. We've tried in the roadmap to phase things. So we've got a phase from 2025 now to 2030, which is about building consensus, putting in the foundations, and then a lot of more scaling up and profound system-level change in the 2030s, and a period of consolidation in the 2040s. So we've tried to conceptually think about what the next 25 years looks like in phases, which I think is something that's perhaps a little bit more, taking the thinking a bit further forward than some of the other pathways that are out there. So I hope you'll find that useful. I think given the time, I'm not going to go through the details of those phases, because you've got the lengthy report there you can look at if you like. Just to say that as we go through those three phases to 2050, we've said that there are some cross-cutting principles that need to be borne in mind throughout. So there's some stuff you can do first, there's some stuff you do in the second phase, and there's some stuff as you consolidate progress. But we think the cross-government coordination is really important to be bearing in mind and keeping a grip on throughout the journey. We've tried to develop a framework that's hinged on the concept of just transitions, so being mindful that change produces winners and losers. We need to be monitoring that, reflecting on it, thinking about what can be done to make this as socially inclusive and just, and providing support for those areas that are likely to see livelihoods affected. A strategic approach to innovation, and building and maintaining public support. So those 4 cross-cutting principles apply throughout the 25-year period. So the roadmap, we hope, serves or will serve as a stimulus to thought and action. I was looking up here in this room that we booked, and I thought, well, I hope people think that the roadmap is a document of unfading splendor. And it will fill you with gladness. You'll rejoice in the gladness evermore, maybe. You've got the summary copies on the chairs, and if you want to take the full meaty one, that's at the back. I'm going to draw the presentation to a close, and we're going to move to a panel discussion. As we invite the panel up onto the table, this is your 7th inning stretch opportunity, as they do in baseball. So, you know, you can be sitting for an hour and 3/4 or so. So a chance to just stand up and have a bit of a stretch. And we're going to have a panel that Stefan is going to introduce. We don't really want, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. We don't really want to encourage questions that are things like, what assumption did you make about carbon emissions from a hectare of Sitka spruce in the model? Although I know some of you are really going to want to know that. So what we're suggesting is, if you've got a question which is about the nuts and bolts of the modelling and the assumption about carbon sequestration per hectare of Sitka spruce, approach Sarah or JP at the reception, and they will happily tell you about that. But we wanted to sort of raise our sights onto these, where do we go from here? You know, what are the big questions on how we take this forward? So how can we create the political space for action? Is question 1. How do we talk about some of these dilemmas without polarization or paralysis? Some of this stuff has been difficult to talk about in the 3 years of our project. And how will we create joined up food systems change under conditions of uncertainty? So they're the questions that we've asked our panel members to consider. And we'll have questions and answers for the audience as part of the panel session. But I'll stop at that point and hand over to Stefan, and have your stretch now.